I'm in a vineyard today, and I'm going to show you guys how to do cane pruning on this vine right here. As you can see, this grapevine is about 5 to 10 years old, depending on how they pruned it. And you can see that it has been cane pruned for the past 2 years. And you can see that by looking at this material right here. So this material right here is the cane from last year. And the cane from last year has a bunch of shoots coming off of it that we want to get rid of this year for cane pruning. So we're going to go through that. I'll show you how to do it. So with cane pruning, what we want to look at is we want to see which canes we want to preserve first, and that's probably the most important. Here we have several options, but what we want to look for is a cane that's long and strong and can be laid down on the wire with at least 8 to 10 buds on it. And if you look up at this whole thing here, there are a couple canes that work. We also want the canes to be close to the trunk itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to look through and pick the ones that we really want. Looking down here, we can see that some of these were cane pruned last year, some of these grapevines. You can see the cane from last year that was laid down to make the fruiting cane for this year. And you can see the renewal spurs that were used to plan for the renewal of this cane next year. Now typically we want to use those renewal spurs and the shoots that come off of them to lay down for the canes for this year or the coming season. But sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes those canes are a little too short or a little too weak, and we have to use the ones that are coming off of the fruiting cane. But in this case, we have a couple options. So we have this one here, which if you follow it up is a pretty good shoot, nice and long, looks pretty healthy. We have this one here that has the same features. We have this one here, it's a little thinner, but would make a good choice for the right side of this cordon. And then we have a couple in the back here that are pretty decent. So let's go through and let's cut off the original canes from last year, and that would be right here and right here. And we don't want to keep that much of this on here, but we do want to make sure that we have some backup tissue or backup shoots in case we screw up with renewal spur shoots here. So what we want to do is just cut it back to where there's a couple of options left. I'm going to cut it back to here. So now you can see that I have 2 good shoots left, just in case, 3 actually. We can get rid of this little one here. For this cane from last year here, you can see that it was a little bit stressed, a little harsh turn there. So what we're going to do again is cut this back, but we're going to cut this back only to 1 shoot because there's only one that would be a viable option. And even this one is a little bit short. So we're just going to forsake this entire cane and cut that off there. So now we're looking and we can remove this tissue here. I like to cut it into pieces sometimes. Makes it a little easier to deal with. And if you want, you can just move it to the side for now, but if you're pruning in an industrial setting, you want to make sure that you remove all the tissue to prevent diseases next year. I'm pulling this off right now. I do want to note that last year you can see that this cane was wrapped around the wire and then tied at the end right here. And you can see that it kept it in place pretty well. The issue is removing that the next year. So right now I'm having a hard time getting rid of this cane. Even though I want to remove it, it's taking a little while. And if you imagine you have several hundred of these to do in an hour, you want to make it as easy as possible. So the other option is not wrapping it, but instead laying it down and just tying it to the wire. Okay, so now you can see that we've removed the canes from last year, and now we're looking at about 10 canes left to make our decisions from for this year. We're going to need 2 canes and at least 2 renewal spurs for next year. And you can see we have plenty of options here. So we have 1 option here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here. This one's a little bit too weak for us, so we're going to remove that now. We have 1 here, we have 1 here, we have 1 here. This one is too much in the center. This one could cause issues because it goes too vertically. So we're going to remove that one now as well. And that leaves us with these 2 and then this big one in the back. Now the key with renewal spurs is that we want them to be low as possible. And this is to keep the head of the trunk itself below the cordon wire here. And in order to do that, we need to pick some of the lower shoots. As far as fruiting canes go, it can be more beneficial to have them closer to the wire so you don't have to bend them as much. However, you also do not want them too close or they will get damaged as they sprout. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to look and we're going to see which of these are going to lay down easily and which ones we're going to have a hard time putting on the wire. And we're going to start with the ones we want the most as our fruiting canes. So there's a couple options here, but I prefer, no matter what, to pick things lower down on the trunk than higher up near the cordon wire. So with our options, we want to see which ones are best suited for this. And one of the aspects we want to look at is how healthy are the buds. And you can do that by looking at if the buds are swollen or if they're flat. If the buds are flat, they're not going to produce very good canes next year. So what we want to do is pick a cane that has buds that are swollen, which should go into pretty good dormancy here in winter at some point. So this shoot right here is a fantastic shoot for either a spur position, which would be a 2-bud spur here, or a cane. I'm leaning more toward cane because it's actually a very good shoot for that. It's going the way we want it to go. It has healthy buds, and it's thick enough and long enough to support fruiting next year. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this back to about 8 to 10 buds. So you count from here, 1. So you would count from the first visible bud that's separated from the base. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You want to go a couple more? 9, 10. You go to 10, you cut through that last bud. Cutting through the bud prevents dieback on the shoot during winter and prevents your tying of the shoot from breaking off on that dieback. So what we're doing here is we're cutting right through the bud. And you can see here, I cut it so that the bud is half cut. That's the right way to do it right there. Okay, so we've cut this cane. Now we want to see if it'll lay down without breaking. And we want to make sure it lays down on the cordon wire. Now this particular vine has 2 options for cordon wires. There's one here, and there's one here. And in one of the cases over here, in the vine next to me, there are 3 cordons. There's 1 on the top wire and there's 2 on the bottom. And this one over here to my left, there is only one cane on a cordon wire. So we could do it based on the vigor of this vine, and you can see that this vine had pretty decent growth last year. The tops actually were so long as they got hedged, so right here. So this vine actually can support at least 2 canes, and we might want to even put 3 on it, but based on the shoot size and the fact that it had 2 canes last year, I would say that it was in pretty good balance. So what we're going to do is we're just going to keep those 2 canes, and we're going to lay down this one first. So I've cut it to 10 buds, and when you wrap it around the wire, you want to make sure that it wraps the opposite way it wants to go. So right now it wants to go over and under. So what I'm going to do is, and you can do that by feel, I'm going to wrap it under and over. And I've already kind of figured out that this cane might be a little too long for what I want. I can tell because the end is hitting the next cane over. So I'm wrapping it, and you can see if you wrap it the right way, it stays in place more or less. Now I can tell this is too long because this part is overlapping with the cane above it. And we need to give enough space to the next grapevine over in order for it to grow properly. So I'm going to cut this back 2 more buds to 8 buds, again through the bud. And now it has 8 buds, and it is along the bottom cordon wire, okay? So now that we have a cane, the first thing we want to do after that is pick a renewal spur position. And we want to pick one that would have originally been a backup for this cane. If you look here, there are a couple options. We want to make sure that it's also low to the ground, and we want to make sure it's below the lowest cordon wire. Okay, so we have our cane, our first cane right here. It has 8 buds, and the last bud is cut through so that it doesn't die back. Now we need a renewal spur. If we're looking over here, the best option is from this renewal spur from last year. You can see it was actually designed to have both a cane and a renewal spur. Now, it doesn't matter which one you pick, but typically you want the renewal spur to be lower than the cane. I chose this one as the cane because this shoot right here is too vertical to lay down going this way. So I'm going to make this a 2-bud spur. You can see here there's 1 bud right there. There's another bud right there. And we're going to cut it at an angle so that any water that it gets doesn't spill onto this bud. So now we have 1 renewal spur and 1 cane. Right? Now I'm not cutting anything that I don't think I need yet because I want to make sure I have all of the pieces to make this vine a good cane prune vine first. So we have 1 cane, 1 renewal spur. Now we should do that for the other side. before proceeding to see if we should save any more canes for next year. So we can see here that there are several options for canes on this side. The two best, in my opinion, are the ones that are going toward the way we want, so we don't have to bend them in any weird ways. So this cane right here is a pretty decent option. It's a little smaller than the one that we just laid down. And this cane is also a decent option, but it's even smaller than the last one. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and lay this one down, and if it snaps, we have a backup here. So I'm going to first remove any obstacles. This shoot is going to become an obstacle to me. But, you know, thinking about it twice, maybe if we have a third cane on this vine, this would be a good one. So I'm not going to remove it. Instead, I'm going to move it out of the way. And to do that, you want to trim off any excess shoot. And just kind of push it off to the side. Same with anything else that might be in your way. Okay, now we have this one as our cane, so let's lay this down right here. So count to 8 to 10 buds. 5, 6, 7, 8. So I cut through the 9th one. And remove any of the tissue that you don't want. Okay. Get rid of these extra laterals and tendrils. You don't want those. And then what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this same as the other one. So it wants to wrap over the wire and then back under. So we're going to go under and then back over. So you can see here that this shoots in the way, so we're going to move that first. And then we're going to wrap this one under. If it cracks a little bit, that's okay. You might want to stretch the shoots. If you stretch them, kind of like you would stretch your hamstrings before you play basketball, then they're going to crack a little bit, and that's fine. Okay, so I wrapped it. It only cracked a little bit, but it didn't break the cambial tissue. And that's another one. So we have 2 canes. Now we're going to get our second renewal spur. Okay, so now we have our 2 canes. We have one here that's below the wire, and we have another one here that's below the wire. And you can see this one cracked a little bit here, and that's okay. As long as that green tissue didn't crack underneath the bark, it'll survive next year and it'll produce fine fruit. All right, so our next order of business is going to be to find that second spur. This is an important process, and we need to make sure that for every 3 canes we have at least 2 spurs. So, one thing, this one might be a good option, but it's growing out into the row. And we can't have that because over time, if we keep choosing those, you'll have a cane system out here. So you want it here. You want it inside this horizontal plane. So we're going to remove that one so it's not even an option. The other option would be this one here. So this one's a pretty good option. This one is pretty tiny, but it could serve the purpose of a renewal spur. So it won't work as a cane. It's too small. You can see how small it is compared with, say, this one that we chose earlier. So I'm going to cut this to 2 buds anyways, since it can't be a cane anyways. And now we're going to say, okay, do we want to keep this one or not? Typically, no. This one is too far away from the trunk, and it's too high and too close to the cordon. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove that one, and by removing the entire shoot from last year, you can see how this wood is different than this wood. This is 1-year-old wood, this is 2-year-old wood. So we're going to remove this 1-year-old wood. Well, sorry, this was 1-year-old wood, yeah, that was 2-year-old wood. We're going to remove that wood, and now we have 2 renewal spurs, and we have 2 canes. Now, based on the growth of this vine, it might be a good idea to leave 1 more cane, but a shorter cane, right? So we're doing this based off of bud count. Right now we have 8 buds here, and we have 8 buds here, and we have two here and 2 here. So that's 4 more, so that's 20 buds. So the average bud count you want on a grapevine is between 20 and 30. So that means we could put on about 10 more buds if we wanted to. Now, I think I'm just gonna put on another probably 6, just because this vine was already pretty well balanced, and we don't wanna ruin that. Also, this has a little bit of extra buds on it, so we're gonna cut it back as far as we can, and give it a little space to die back here for next year. Okay, so what about these two? These are very healthy looking shoots. The problem is they're way above where we want them to be. This is also a cordon wire, so if we were to lay down one more cane up here, we could make one of these a renewal spur. And I think that's what we're gonna do. Typically, you'd only have one cordon wire, and this would be it, right? You would have one cane here, one renewal spur, another renewal spur, and then one more cane. That's typically where a cane prune vine ends. But this one has a double cordon. So this is an upper and lower cordon wire. So we're gonna respect that, and we're gonna leave one more cane and one more renewal spur. So these are very vertical. It would be best to leave those as renewal spurs most likely. So I'm gonna cut this one first because I like the other one better. Sometimes it's just preference. And now this is gonna be my renewal spur, and this is gonna be my cane. Or should it be this be my cane and this be my renewal spur? Or sorry, this be my renewal spur and this be my cane. Well, this one's lower, and I think it's better to have this one as our renewal spur because next year we'll have a lower starting position. So this one's gonna be our cane, and we're gonna try that before we cut the other one. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 buds. Now remember, we want fewer buds on this cane, but let's cut it to 8 first, and then see if we have the space to make it a little shorter. So cut off all these little extra things. Don't cut the buds. And now we're gonna lay this cane here on this wire. And because it's on this side, it's best to lay it on the side that it's growing on. So we're going to wrap it. It wants to go this way, so we're gonna make it go the other way, right? And you're gonna bend it a little so that you hear that little snapping, but no cracking. It's not Rice Krispies. You don't want snap, crackle, and pop. You just want a little bit of snap. Okay, hear that? That's the snap that you're okay with. All right, so now we have these double canes. And now this one can be our last renewal spur. You don't actually need another renewal spur, but in a case like this, it would be good to have. Okay, so we're on the other side of the vine now, and you can see again how we did this. 1, 2, 3 canes. There's 2 renewal spurs on the other side, and we're gonna make one last one here. So this one has, you can count it, 1 bud there, and 1 bud here. So we're gonna make that a 2 bud spur. And this came off the wire, so you wanna make sure that you tie these down if you get the chance. Okay, so this is our finished vine from that first product that you saw. We're going to just make sure that we tie down these canes so they don't go anywhere this winter. During the temperature shifts, these canes do swell and increase in size or decrease in size depending on the temperature, if it's colder or hotter. So we're just going to tie the ends with a little tie tape. And because these are cane pruned, next year it's okay if they're a little bit wrapped because the wire won't grow into the cane in 1 year. And you want to wrap the canes at the very last segment, so the last internode. That way, if it does die back a little bit, at least there's some tissue that will prevent it from breaking. Okay, and one last one. Okay, so this cane prune vine has 1 more renewal spur than we actually need. For every 3 canes, you're supposed to have 2. But in this case, we left 3 because this had 2 renewal spurs and 2 canes last year, and we're going to see if it can support that extra renewal spur, an extra couple buds on this cane. So last thing to do is check bud count. We have 2, 4, 6 on the renewal spurs, 16 here, that's 22, plus another 6 on this tiny cane that I made. So that puts us at 28, which is within our 20 to 30 bud range that we want for the average grapevine. Okay. All right, so this is also a cane prune grapevine. But you can tell that the canes are really strong last year. They're very thick. They put on a lot of girth during the summer this year. So it's actually really valuable to think about if you want to leave this one spur pruned. And because I don't own this vineyard, I'm not going to spur prune this whole thing. But we're going to go through and we're going to count which areas would be good spur positions together. And we're going to leave this center part alone where you would typically cane prune so that the owners of this property can cane prune the vine later on this winter. Okay, so with this grapevine, we can see that if we were to cane prune this, we would want to select some canes at the bottom that would be our canes and some that would be renewal spurs for next year. And you can see there's a couple options, right? So there is this guy, this one. This is the wood from last year. You can tell by the cracking and the kind of red hue and the darker bark on the outside that's forming. This one, these down here, this one here, and then a few over here. And typically you would want to cut back to right where these start so that you can choose which positions you want a little easier without all this extra noise from the extra shoots everywhere, right? You would treat this as a double-headed system, so there'd be, you'd think this was the top of one part, and this would be the top of the second part, and you wouldn't want to go below those points when you're picking your shoots. But what we're going to do is we're going to look through and see which of these would be good spur positions for a spur prune vine. So if you're looking at this, right, this cane ends here, this cane ends here, and you can see that these positions are pretty well placed, at least 6 inches apart here, 6 inches apart here, here, and then there's a few that kind of flip upside down. So for instance, this one is growing downwards and then back up. We don't want that. We want to remove that. So let's just remove all the ones that we don't want first, right? Same with this one here. It's also growing down and then back up. So we're going to remove that one too. And we're going to go through and do that on all of these, right? So here's another one. Are there any more here? Here's one that didn't even grow that much, so we want to remove that. And let's keep going. Over here. Not much over here that needs to be removed. So if we were to create a spur prune vine out of this one, I would start from the end and I would say, okay, how many shoots do I want per foot of cordon? Typically 2. So this is the very end. So I'm going to ignore that for now. This one's in a great position, right? This would be a 2-bud spur. So we'd cut it there, 2-bud spur. Same with this one, 1, 2. Now, if you're in Napa, that would be a 1-bud spur. You'd want to cut it here. They're a little picky about that. Here as well. This one's a good 3 to 4 inches away. That's acceptable. The worst that happens is we have to come through and thin a couple of these up later on during winter. Same here, 2-bud spur. That's actually a 3-bud spur, so that's a little too tall, right? And now we're at the point where I don't want to cut anymore because I want them to cane prune this vine if they want to. So we'll go to the top one. You can see here, same thing. Good 2-bud spur position, right? This one's from the next vine over, so let's cut that one back and get it out of our way to a 2-bud spur. All right, here we go, another 2-bud spur. Get rid of all this excess tissue so we can see what we're doing. Okay, and then another 2-bud spur here. Now these are very close together, these two. So we'd probably only want to pick one of them, but we're going to decide that based on where the next one is. Okay, so the next one often would be right here, but we removed that because it was weak. This one, however, is very strong, so we're going to keep that one. And again, we're going to stop there because I want to let them cane prune this, but with these two here, we would probably only want one of them, and this one's much stronger. So we're going to remove this one. And now there's enough space for those shoots to grow happily. Finally, this part here, we'll probably keep some of it. Let's keep a 2-bud spur because it's not overlapping with the next vine. And the next vine has very weak shoots here. So this is going to counteract this weakness and hopefully grow over it so that we don't have this happen again next year. Okay, so we're on the other side of the grapevine now. Again, this area is no-go right now. So what we're going to do is start right about here. And we're going to, first off, remove some of the tissue that's in our way. Oh, maybe not. Okay, so this is a very weak shoot, right? It wouldn't be good as a cane or a spur, but we're going to make it a 1-bud spur. And that's because of how weak it is. You can see how weak it is. it can only support one bud next year. If it was stronger, we'd leave 2. So we're only leaving 1 on this one. Now there's a big gap between this shoot that we just cut and the next one over right here. So we're gonna leave 2 buds on this one. And even though it's very close to the next vine, the next spur position over, we're gonna leave this one as well to make up for this huge gap in space. So we're gonna leave a 2 bud spur on this one as well. Maybe even a 3 bud spur. See, this are too long. We wanna make those 2, okay? And then this one's also very weak. It's a small shoot. So we're gonna leave 1 bud on it. And we're gonna leave what looks like a 2 bud spur, but the bud on the other side here, you can't see it really, but it's very weak. So we're gonna leave this one as our golden bud. And then finally, this one here overlaps a lot with the next vine. So I don't know if I really wanna keep it, but I'm going to, for the sake of experimentation. We're gonna remove some of that dead tissue from last year, here. And then we're gonna see we got 1 bud, 2 buds, and this one's pointed down and these are pointed up. So we're gonna stick with that, those 2 that are pointed upwards here, and try not to cut the wire. Okay, good. And then finally, the last one up here, same thing, overlapping with the next vine over. So we wanna keep just 1 or 2 buds, no more than that. And we have these 2 positions that are very well spaced here. So we'll make these 2 bud spurs, no problem. 1, 2. Now typically you would pull those shoots off, but because I'm showing you, I'm just cutting them. And then finally, coming over here, this would be the last one we do. There's a huge gap here, you can see it. So there's nothing, 2 bud spur. We'll make this a 2 bud spur and not worry about it till next season. Last note about this vine. If you were to make this a spur prune cordon train vine, you want to clean up this whole middle part right here. And in order to do that, you would remove any shoots that are pointed vertically up, and you would create kind of an open space right in the middle of this vine so that there's enough air and light that goes through here during the growing season. Because this is cane pruned, I will not be doing that, but typically you would want to prune anything that's not horizontal or parallel with the way the row goes. If it's pointed out into the vineyard, you want to get rid of it. Okay, one more thing. What would you do in a situation where you don't have very many good options? There's not a lot you can do here, right? So this is a cane pruned vine again. Well, what we want to do first is find out which canes might be viable as canes or fruiting canes for next year. And you can see on this side, there's nothing. All these shoots are less than 2 feet long. They're not going to help us. We're not going to be able to lay down on the wire. The best we got here is a renewal spur. So we're going to just remove everything below, that's above the cordon wire, right? And our goal here is remediating this vine so that it's healthy next year. So it clearly couldn't support the amount of shoots it had, so we're going to only leave it with 1 cane and 1 renewal spur and see if that helps remediate or balance out the vine a little better. Now what we're going to look at is, okay, this is another cane from last year. You can see it's a little older. This also has tiny shoots all the way across. So we're not going to leave that either. We're going to remove that. All the way down to the base. None of that is usable. You can see right here. None of that is usable. Okay, well now we're going to look and see which canes are long enough to use. There's only a handful, and there's only a handful that are low enough to use as well. So that leaves us with very few options. So this one here, let me just move it a little bit so you can see which one I'm talking about. This one here would be a really good cane. It's low down, but it would also be a really good renewal spur. So I'm leaning toward renewal spur, just so that we can make this thing a little bit more strong next year. We're only leaving 1 cane, so let's only leave 1 cane. So that's an option. We don't want to cut anything until we have all our options. Same thing here. So I'm going to remove this one because it's too short to do anything with and too small. And this one is also too short and too small, but I'm going to leave this one as a 2-bud spur because it could never be a cane anyways. And that gets it out of my way, but keeps it as an option for a spur. Now down here, same thing. Too small for a cane, good, okay option for a spur. So I'm going to leave it as a spur. Okay. Now this one is too short to be a cane and too high to be a spur. I think this one in particular is going to just be gone. I don't think we're going to use it at all. So I'm going to remove this whole section here, and maybe I'll leave it as a spur for now, but my plan is to remove that later. Okay. Now we look down here, we have pretty good potential cane. So we're going to use this as our cane. You want to clean up all the extra tissue that was on there, and then you want to wrap it around the wire the opposite way it wants to go. And then count the buds and cut it at 8 to 10. In this case, let's just do 6. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now you cut through the 7. Okay, now we have a short cane. That's great. Now we're going to look up here, and you can see that up here, this shoot is pretty useless for us. So we're going to remove that. And you can see that there's a bunch of dead tissue up here that's going to sprout, water sprouts, suckers, whatever you want to call them. So we're going to just remove the top of this cane altogether, or this trunk, I'm sorry. Okay, and you can also see that this has some fungal tissues in it. It's got a little black. This is the pith, but if we were to look over here, you'd be able to see it a little better. It's another good thing about pruning when you're out here. If you make big cuts, you can identify where there are infections relatively easily. Okay, so we're just gonna leave this one as a cane for now, and it's gonna be a 6-bud cane because we want to have fewer buds, so this thing can grow a little better. And we're only gonna leave 1 renewal spur at the end of this. So total, we're gonna only have about 15 to 18 buds on this vine. So what I'm gonna do is lay this one down first and see if it's gonna go. So it wants to, again, go over and under. So I'm going to make it go under and over because that's how I am. You're going to let it crack a little, snap a little bit, but not crack, right? Remove any of the tissues that are in the way. And now I'm going to cut it here first. And now we can see how many buds we have left. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We don't want more than 6 on this one. It's a weak vine. So we're going to cut it through the last bud here. We're going to put it on the wire. Okay, now this one doesn't want to stay, so we're going to tie it before we move on to the next thing. Very often you're going to have to tie things before you move it on to the next thing, and that's okay. Gives you something to do beyond almost cutting your fingers off. All right. So now we have 2 short canes. We have one here and we have one here. Okay? Now we only need 1 renewal spur on this one because it's a weak vine. Now we just want to pick one that is in a good position, that's low enough and strong enough that we think it's going to grow. So it's not going to be these ones. None of the wood from last year is going to do. So we're going to cut off all the old wood from last year. And we don't think this one's going to be that great because it's kind of weak, right? So we only have maybe a couple options. This one here, but this one's a little bit too high for a lower renewal spur. It could be a great upper renewal spur. So we kind of don't want 2 renewal spurs on this one. So I'm going to cut it to 2 buds as an option. And that way we have options for later, right? Now the only other option we have is this one. And this one's, you can't tell from there, but it's kind of far out into the row. I'm going to cut this one to a 2-bud spur as well. And then I'm going to remove any of these little extra dinky shoots that are along the trunk, okay? So I'm removing those, anything that shouldn't be there for next year, any of the old wood that was there left on the canes from last year, I'm removing all that first. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so right now I have 2 canes and I have 4 options for renewal spurs. I have one here, I have one here, I have one here, and I have one here. Okay? I want to pick the lowest, strongest one, and preferably in the middle of the row. That's not easy. Okay, so we have our 4 options for renewal spurs. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now this one in the back, you can see that bud is not particularly healthy. This bud right here is a little small, and it's not quite as big and swollen as this one is, right here. So we're gonna remove this one. It's also inside the canopy, so we don't want that. So that one's gone now. Now we only have 3 options for renewal spurs. Now this one's in the best position possible. It's relatively low compared to the upper cordon wire, but the problem is it's very weak. You can see how small it is here compared to the shears. So I'm thinking I don't want this one anymore. So I'm gonna remove that. And you can see here a little bit of fungal pathogen right there. This is why you wanna prune yourself. Okay, we see that here as well. There's fungal pathogen right there. And what we kind of want to do is remove some of that tissue if possible. And look at that. I just cut through a lot of the fungal pathogen. This was the top, and that was underneath it. Okay, and now we have 2 options. This one or this one. This one is low enough in my ideal position. You can see where it is on the shoot here. This is the one I'm going to keep as the renewal spur. Now this one I also don't want to get rid of entirely because it could be a good option for a renewal spur for the upper part of this cordon after the vine recovers. So instead of leaving a 2-bud spur, I'm only going to leave a 1-bud spur. And I'm going to hope that that becomes a great renewal spur position in the future. Okay, so that's how you remediate a very weak vine. And you can see it there.